Welcome to the strange and disturbing world of terror at Collinwood. Before we get to the show, I want to thank the sensational, wonderful, and very generous John Logan for his patronage and support of the podcast. You heard John back in episode 76, and he is, of course, the celebrated award-winning playwright and screenwriter behind such things as Hugo, Showtime's Penny Dreadful, The Gladiator, Red, The Aviator, and much more. For all his accomplishments, John is a down-to-earth, friendly, and humble person whose own work I greatly admire, so I'm honored that he'd make substantial contributions to help support this show. So thank you, John. It's truly and sincerely appreciated. I also want to thank those who've contributed through the Buy Me a Coffee page, many of which prefer to remain anonymous, but I'll mention names that have appeared publicly on the Buy Me a Coffee page over the past year, including Michael, Dana, Ted, Brenda, Paige, Patty, Scott, Frank, NB, Brian, Caroline, Jennifer, Guy, Lisa, and the legendary Catherine Lee Scott. And thank you so much to all of the anonymous Buy Me a Coffee donors. I know who some of you are, and I appreciate you, so thank you. Putting this podcast together is definitely a labor of love. You would be surprised, maybe depressed to hear how much time I spend working on this podcast. I don't make any money doing this since I don't have advertisers on the podcast. So thank you to everyone for helping to support my mission to keep the candles burning at the old house. Dark shadow shall not die. Long may it remain undead. Sorry, I got a little carried away there. Now, on to other news. Congratulations to Patty Karapinar for being the big winner in the Vampire Vineyards contest. Patty won the Vampire Starter Kit and several items in the contest, including a Terror at Collinwood t-shirt. Speaking of which, you too can nab your own Terror at Collinwood or Penny Dreadful's Shilling Shockers t-shirts over at TeePublic. The link's in the show notes. In fact, on YouTube, you can see a couple of snazzy pictures of delightful horror host Rob Gruesome Graves with his new Penny and Garou t-shirts. So thank you, Rob, for getting those. Be sure to check out the Haunted Hotel in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's a great show, and on the Monster Channel, and in other locales as well. Oh, and I'm told that Catherine Cressman's Shunned Houses article is in the latest issue of Mensa Bulletin. She says, this article is taken from the introduction to one of two new books I have out. Shunned Houses, an anthology of weird stories, unspeakable poems, and impious essays, edited by Catherine Cressman and S.T. Joshi, Wordcrafts Press. So there you have it. And with that, let's get to the show. Be careful, my friend, where you tread, for I warn you now, there are spoilers ahead. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, Penny Dreadful, joined by fellow horror host, Undead Johnny, although we are in our civilian disguises, don't tell anyone. Starting on Halloween 2004, in the guise of his alter ego Undead Johnny, Chad Byers hosted the World of Weird Monster Show, a horror host / sketch comedy show. Along with the World of Weird Monster Show players, Undead Johnny's spooky and hilarious program ran on Comcast Cable out of Chicago, Illinois. You can still watch the show, selected clips and episodes on YouTube. Chad is also the mastermind behind the Draigenmore Adventure Etsy shop, where he sells unique handmade accessories and terrain for Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop RPGs. He makes diorama dice trays, dice towers, spell slot trackers, as well as other accessories and terrain pieces. Chad also makes small and large-scale diorama pieces, often with a horror theme. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
oh my God, it's a pleasure. We've been talking about this for I've been wanting to bring you on as a guest for years now. You were, like early on when I started the podcast. I remember, you were posting a lot about Dark Shadows. Chad's
Yeah.
a big Dark Shadows fan. And I know I wanted to bring you on to talk about the show, and so I'm glad this is finally happening. And it's crazy because we were talking about before we started recording, we have not actually ever met or spoken in person, but it feels like we have.
No, it totally. I guess that's the internet, the world we live in now. I feel like we know each other and have spoken many times, but yeah,
Yeah.
we've never actually spoken like this live. I was a big fan of your show,
Oh, thank
all
you.
that time, and
Likewise.
so we've known each other for a while. But yeah, it's weird that this is the first time we're talking.
Yeah. Oh my God. When you were doing your show, I remember back when I don't know, it was like some of my early interviews at the time on websites and stuff, and they'd always ask me some of my favorite horror hosts, and I would often mention Undead Johnny because I always thought your show was really funny. I loved your character on Undead Johnny, and just your cast too. You had a good cast, and you did a lot of really fun stuff. It was a fun show.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of fun, and I think our show, like your show, was a little different from the normal. Not that there's anything wrong with the single camera, horror host show, but I
Mhm.
know, you had a very talented director off screen as well. And
Rebecca Paiva, yeah.
exactly, yeah. And we, I think both of us tried to do little things different and just be a little special in our own way. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was always a big fan of yours, and thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. But these days you're doing Draigenmore Adventures. So what is talk a little bit about Draigenmore Adventures, and I will
Yeah,
put links in the show notes to all of this, folks.
great. Yeah, I mean, I it's an Etsy shop, and I've been playing D&D since I was 10, and other RPGs and all that stuff my whole life. And during the pandemic, when we were all looking for ways to be creative, and we were kind of locked up, I started making terrain and dice trays and things like that, and I just loved it. So I've been doing it ever since. So yeah, I'll make like dioramas. So it might be like a tavern themed dice tray with like, the Tudor kind of walls, and inside it will be a tavern scene, but you can roll your dice in the middle, or, large dice trays. I also make dioramas of different scenes, usually horror type stuff. But unique things. I try to make one of a kind type stuff that, will be really, if you show up with it at your gaming table, you'll look pretty cool. So.
Yeah, and I'll show some pictures while we're talking here for the video version. They're really cool. So, what about the Dark Shadows diorama? When is that happening?
I need to do one. I did Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman ones last year for Halloween. I did a really big Chilling Adventures of Sabrina one,
Mhm.
or the funeral home, Spellman mortuary behind her. And I was thinking I really need to do uh, of the Collinwood entryway, because I think it would be a really cool one to do. Eagle Hill Cemetery would be cool too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but and that'd be easier. But the entryway would be really cool. So as we've been talking about it, over the last week or so, I think it's something I'm going to start. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be super cool. I would love to show pictures of that on here. And if you make that available for sale, I would definitely pick one of those up because that
There you
sounds
go.
really cool. And I want to circle back a little bit to Dark Shadows RPG talk. But first, I want to hear about how you got into Dark Shadows originally.
Yeah, I was kind of always aware of it. I don't know exactly when, but as a monster kid growing up, I
Mhm.
kind of was aware that there was this horror soap opera with like a vampire and a werewolf and stuff, and I had never seen it. It wasn't on, as far as I know, it wasn't on in syndication or reruns or anything where I grew up. I mean, I did have Chicago stations as well. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois. So we had Rockford stations, Chicago stations, but I wasn't aware of it. So it wasn't until the Sci-Fi Channel
Mhm.
when they started running it. And even then, I don't think I had Sci-Fi Channel at the time. But the first time I saw it, I was visiting a friend in Wisconsin. My car broke down in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I was trapped there for like 4 days. The hotel did have Sci-Fi Channel, and that was the first time I ever saw it. I don't remember. It was early because it was black and white. There was a lot of Eagle Hill Cemetery stuff.
Uh-huh.
But I remember thinking it was very cool. Um, and then later on, I was running a theater, and the store next door was one of those, music's DVD type, had everything. And they had the MPI sets. And I remember seeing that volume one, which started with Barnabas. So the what 205, right? 205 to 210,
210.
somewhere in
210.
there.
I think it's
But that's
210.
where volume one, quote unquote,
Yeah.
starts there. And I remember it was like 1999 and it was 40 episodes. So I was like, if I don't like it, it's only $20. But if I do like it, it's 40 episodes. And of course, one episode in, I was just hooked, devoured the 40 episodes, kept buying another set, another set, another set. I got up to like 8 or 9, early Adam.
Uh-huh.
Definitely it was before Vampire Angelique, before Nicholas Blair.
Mhm.
Uh, in that, but I think Dr. Lane might have still been alive. But it was around that time that I think the store closed. I just wasn't able to get them anymore. And like Best Buy didn't have them. I guess I could have ordered them from MPI or something, but I just didn't. So every year around Halloween, I would get the itch to watch it again, and I would just watch those same ones over and over. And then eventually it started coming up on streaming services. And so I'm like, I just need to start where I left off. If I keep starting at 200, whatever, I'll just never finish. So I started looking through episode guides and stuff to figure out where I left off. And I found Dark Shadows Every Day, the blog. Danny Horn, who I know you've had
Yeah.
on.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah. And I found that and I was reading some of those and I figured out exactly where I left off, and started watching it from there. And then I had the extra joy of then reading the blog with it.
Yeah.
Not that I need help to finish Dark Shadows because it's awesome, but it was like kind of watching it with a friend. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
I'd watch
Sure.
one, two, three of them, and then at night I went to bed, I'd read those entries because they were so great. Um, and it helped. I mean, it definitely made it more, not that again, it wouldn't be pleasurable, but it just was great.
It enriches
And
the
I,
experience because yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because that blog was fantastic. And I mean, over the 1,000 entries, he covers the fandom, the behind the
Mhm.
scenes stuff, the movie, the comics, the book. I mean,
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
or the books, everything. So you get an overall education of Dark Shadows as well. So that was great. And so then I finished them all. That's how I watched them all.
Yeah. Oh, great. Very cool. What's your favorite storyline out of all of them?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, I probably because I watched it so many times with the DVDs, I do really love the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Atmosphere and the slow burn.
The
And
pre-Barnabas shows.
well, I like that. I do like that stuff.
Okay.
But the Barnabas, when Barnabas first
Oh,
came up,
gotcha. Yep.
yeah, I mean, the beginning of Dark Shadows as we know it, kind of.
Right. Right.
I do just love that slow burn. I'm a sucker for someone looking wistfully out a window and saying there's a storm coming and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I love that. But then I also do love the monster mash stuff when it just goes crazy later on. But I don't know. So maybe the first flashback, 1795 I remember blowing my mind when I first saw it.
Uh-huh.
Um, I kind of like the Leviathan a lot. I mean, it's not my
Yeah.
favorite, but I definitely I
I do
like it
too.
more than most. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, the whole kind of after the dream curse that when they, all that stuff. I just love it all. I do
How,
like the Adam stuff. I mean, it kind of peters off and just sort of ends.
yeah, I like Adam. I love the
Yeah.
Adams. I love them all. It's difficult
Yeah.
for me
It's
to
hard.
say a storyline that I don't like, honestly, because I'm like
Yeah.
I like all of them. But how do you feel in terms of how Dark Shadows fits into like the overall? I guess if you look at the Monster Kid tapestry, if you will, or if there's like a pyramid and each block represents something that Monster Kids love. How does Dark Shadows fit into that mix, do you think?
I mean, for me, it's like I said, every Halloween, it's like that's what I want to watch.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? And I feel like it's because it encapsulates so many things. It obviously borrows storylines from so many of our
Oh
favorite,
yeah.
horror things. So in terms of like where it fits, I feel like as a monster kid, it's all the things you love, but like packaged together, kind of.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's
Yep.
got spooky ghost stuff, it's got werewolves, it's got vampires, it's got Satanism and witchcraft and black magic and time travel. It's just got all of it kind of
Yeah.
together. So to me, it's kind of like represented. Like I could be like, hey, this is what I like,
Yeah.
and it would sort of shed light on all the other type stuff I do like and as well.
Yeah. Have you ever found this is something I have found occasionally is that people sometimes have a resistance to watching the show because they hear soap opera, the phrase soap opera, and that seems to be sort of I think that kind of hurts the chances of people wanting to check it out just because they have a kind of a, especially horror fans when
Right,
I've
right.
noticed occasionally I'm like, no, it's not really what you think it is when you hear that phrase. This is something very
Yeah,
unique.
especially later on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that didn't bother. I kind of like soap operas.
Oh, okay.
My mom, I didn't watch them per se, but my mom did, and she was a teacher, so she recorded them during the day
Uh-huh.
as the world turns and guiding light. And
Uh-huh.
she would watch them when she got home, and I would usually sometimes be in the room or whatever. And I was pretty up on the different plot lines and what was going on. So I didn't have any prejudice against soap operas. One of my other favorite TV shows is Twin Peaks,
Uh-huh.
and especially the early ABC run was, I mean, a nighttime soap, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So um, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
But I can see it, that, or people just see bloopers and that's all they've seen is like a collection
Yeah.
of tombstones falling over and they can't really get past that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's a lot of fun and there is things to laugh at and laugh with,
Mhm.
but you know,
I have friends who can't get past the repetition in the early stuff. And even in the Barnabas storyline, I said, really? I didn't think it was that. They found, the conversations where they recap stuff. But as the show goes, I tried to tell them, like, as the show goes on, especially once Sam Hall comes in as a writer, I
yeah,
think the pace really picks up because then the writers are like, well, too bad if you miss an episode, you got to watch every day, kind of, kind of a thing. So,
yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, and let's face it, there's stuff in one episode later on that they would have used to draw out for like 3 weeks
Hmm.
at the beginning. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? The
for
pace
sure.
is so much faster as it goes.
Yeah, but like you, I don't mind the slow burn either. Like I like
Mm,
that. Like I kind of dig that. Especially if it's like a cold, snowy night outside, and
yeah.
I put dark shadows on. I'm just like it doesn't matter to me that it's slow. It's actually kind of soothing in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like reading a book. I mean, I mean, obviously they were trying to fill time,
Yeah,
but they had time. And
yeah,
so, yeah, we know at the beginning Barnabas is a vampire, but I love all the stuff like, why is Willie acting so different? Or
yeah.
there's these farm animals that are somehow drained of blood. And I heard there
Right.
was a girl attacked on the docks. I mean, like we know what's going on, but I do love the slow burn of it.
Yeah,
Um, I really dig stuff like that. And the
yeah.
foreboding. I just can't get enough of it.
Totally, same here in the
Yeah.
suspense. And now you talked about you're a long time role playing game fan and play. I used to play too. I used to play D&D, and I've been in other campaigns too over the years. Not these days, but I played Call of Cthulhu and some of the
Mhm.
other stuff. But I did play D&D when I was in high school, and I got into Ravenloft, which was the only campaign I ever DM'd was Ravenloft, which I think that I am eventually going to do an episode on Ravenloft. I was talking to Charles Rutledge about it, and he's going to bring somebody on who actually worked on Ravenloft, I believe. So,
Oh,
but
awesome.
yeah, so that'll be kind of cool. So, I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, no.
But what about Dark Shadows as a role-playing game? Like, why has that not happened? Like, it seems like they've done Doctor Who and other stuff. Like, is Dark
Yeah,
Shadows, would it work as a role-playing game?
I think it would work great. I mean, maybe it's not as many people know about it as like Doctor Who and stuff, maybe, but in today's day and age, when you can do something crowdfunded,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a good idea. I mean, they covered so many types of stories, and there's so many different creatures and stuff. And I mean, I mean, in the 80s, D&D was super popular. I
Mhm.
mean, I remember back, you could get beach towels with D&D. I mean, it was all over, but it's arguably as popular, if not more popular now, starting with Stranger Things and things like Critical Role and Live Play. And I think role playing itself is more popular now than before.
Yeah.
It was more of a dungeon crawler kind of thing back in the day. And now it's more about exploring characters, and especially people watch, like Critical Role, they watch these voice actors play D&D, and
Yeah.
they're really acting their hearts out. And, and I think so people are more into role playing now than they were. And let's face it, for a Dark Shadows RPG based basically on a soap opera, I mean, role playing is where it's at. You know what I mean? I feel like you could really do it up.
So would you be one of the characters from the show, or would you be like a new character that comes to Collinsport to like investigate what's going on? Like, how
I
would you
think
set it up?
I think you would have to do it as new people.
Mhm.
Maybe have the characters in the show be NPCs.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think you would have to bring everyone would have to be somebody new.
I agree.
So they're
Yeah.
invested in their own character as well, but also just, to lead your way into the world.
Mhm. I think it would be really interesting, and I wish somebody would. You mentioned the crowdfunding, but I would imagine you have to get the license for
Right.
Dark Shadows to do that
That's very
through
true. Yeah.
Dan Curtis's daughters. But it just seems like that somebody at some point should do it. So hopefully that will happen. I think that would be
Yeah. I
cool.
mean, Call of Cthulhu is still very popular. I mean, Strahd, Curse of Strahd, even in the most current edition of D&D, is one of their most popular. The new version of Ravenloft in 5e
Yeah.
is one of the most popular modules.
Mhm.
So people still do love horror RPGs. I think it would be great.
Yeah, for sure. And Ravenloft, I mean, it has like Strahd, we were talking about before we recorded, Tatiana is a very Josette type
Right.
situation with Strahd and Tatiana. And then you have all the Dark Lords of Ravenloft who are like Dark Shadows. They took all the classic horror archetypes from literature
Totally.
and film and put them all in one domain,
Totally. Yeah,
you know.
totally.
And it was kind of it's on a demi-plane. It used to be like a demi-plane, and you would
Yeah,
get
it still is. You kind of go through those myths
the mists of
and
Ravenloft, and you get sucked into that
transport there.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's detached from the
Right.
main world, like just like Collinsport kind of is too. Like in all those
Yeah.
gothic horror stories, it's this a lot of times it's this very isolated place
Right.
that's not really connected in some way to tangibly to the real world. Really interesting stuff. So very cool. So the topic for that we're going to talk about today, I reached out to you and I asked you to pick a Dark Shadows character to talk. I said send me like 5 Dark Shadows characters, and I said not the big guns,
Right.
but major characters were on the table, and you picked Professor Timothy Eliot Stokes, which
I did not even hesitate.
I don't blame you for that because Professor Stokes is wonderful. And folks, at the end of this episode, I am going to play a very rare interview with Thayer David that came from the Ron Barry show. There were 2 takes of the interview. It's going to be at the end of this episode. And I want to thank Bob Issel for giving me the okay to play those interviews. And you can get a 2 CD set from Bob that contains a whole bunch of Ron Barry interviews. You just email him at bobubis59@gmail.com, and you can talk to him about that. But I'll say more information about that later. But Professor Stokes, okay, so first of all, what a great character, what a great actor Thayer David was, but Professor Stokes, such a polar opposite character from what we had seen from him prior to that in the show with Matthew Morgan and Ben Stokes. So this is Professor Stokes is his descendant. So why did you choose Professor Stokes?
I love that type of character. I mean, you're right. I watched the beginning stuff later, so the Matthew Morgan stuff I didn't see till later. So
Mhm.
Ben Stokes was my first real Thayer David, and
Same.
he was
Yeah.
so good. I
Yeah.
mean, he's so good. So I was thrilled to see him back as an actor. But I just love that type of occult investigator,
Yeah.
expert
Yes.
type character in any story. I mean, not only is he kind of eccentric and just weird in a cool way, but I just love that type of character that seems to know a little bit about everything.
Mhm.
And you don't know if it's firsthand experience or how much of it is he just heard or read in some old tome, or if I mean, it's just it makes him mysterious. It makes him cool. It kind of rises him up a little bit. I mean, I kind of have a theory. I was thinking about it. We talk about a little bit later. He's kind of a bridge, I think, between the 2 types of stories in Dark Shadows.
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
think a little bit, but I just love that character. John Constantine. Clive Barker's Harry D'Amour. The one he reminds me the most of. I don't know if you've ever seen Friday the 13th, the series, the
I have the
Canadian,
box
like
set on
syndicated.
DVD, and I have to watch them all. I watched assorted ones
Yeah,
back when it originally aired, but there is a character like Stokes
there's
in
a
that.
Jack Marshak. He's an older
Yeah,
guy that helps the
yeah,
2 cousins, and
yeah.
he's just like Professor Stokes. He just he knows a little bit about everything,
Hmm.
black magic, rituals,
Yeah.
cults, the occult. He knows it all, and he's very reminds me a lot of Professor Stokes.
I have the DVD box set. I got to jump back into that because I remember when it originally aired, I did watch sorted episodes and I enjoyed
Yeah.
it. And then I bought the DVD set, and it's been sitting on my shelf, and I just have to make the time to kind of dive into
Yeah,
that.
some hold up better than others, but I mean,
Yeah,
David Cronenberg directed an episode. I mean,
yeah.
it's got some really good ones, but he reminds me of that. But even stuff like Hellboy,
Mm,
I mean, when we had talked, you brought up Van Helsing. It's just that
yes.
type of character, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
it's cool, and it makes them more of a adversary than a victim,
Yeah.
I think, because they kind of know the rules of the game a little bit.
Exactly.
And so I just love him. I went back and watched. I knew we were going to talk, so I watched some of his first. I remember liking him right off the bat, and I was like, I wonder why. And I went back and watched some of the first ones, and he's just so great. I mean, he's trying to buy the Angelique painting, and he's acting just kind of weird. But he talks to Barnabas outside, and he knows, I think this is Angelique the witch because he read Ben's, unpublished, journals. And
Uh-huh.
right off the bat, he says to Barnabas, I'm a student of the occult,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And then Barnabas, after Cassandra shows up, Barnabas tries to get the talisman from him, and like just his third, fourth, fifth appearance or something. And Stokes shows up at Barnabas's the old house and demands sherry and brandy because Barnabas is just like, all right, give me the talisman, let's go.
I know.
And he's like,
Stokes
I
calls him
need
on
some
being
sherry.
on his rudeness.
Yeah, then he starts talking about the furniture. He's like, oh, is that an original blah 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 or so? And
Pity he
flipping the
was
table
drunk.
up. He's just great. I love him so much. And I love that he's just kind of an expert. Whenever they needed somebody to be an expert, it was believable because he
Yes.
was this occult investigator guy. So
Hmm. Yeah, perfectly stated. You nailed it. I mean, uh, Professor Stokes is this is an archetype, as you've pointed out. You've listed several examples of that, of the sage occult scholar or the occult investigator, the psychic doctor. I mean, this is it started. I think the first example of that was Dr. Martin Hesselius in Sheridan Le Fanu's was it the glass mirror? That it's is it called? It's just in a glass darkly. That's what it was in 1872, and he was kind of the framing device in those stories. It was a set of 5 stories, and then I think he was like the first example of that. But then that spawned several other characters who were similar, in particular Professor Abraham Van Helsing and Bram Stoker's Dracula. And Van Helsing is sort of kind of the go-to when you think, okay, this is that archetype of this type of character. So, but he was certainly not the only one. There are many, as you listed, several examples there. I would even put Dr. Henry Armitage from H.P. Lovecraft and maybe in that bucket. But we continue to see this in films and stuff like that. But Professor Stokes is such a great example of that. And even then we go into House of Dark Shadows and he goes full on vampire hunter mode
yeah,
too,
yeah,
you know, and then full on vampire too.
right, yeah,
So, so he's a formidable threat when he comes into the show. Okay, this is as you said. I mean, he knows the rules of the game. He's the one you go to when you're dealing with supernatural threats. He's the one who knows how to enter the dream curse and confront
yeah.
Angelique.
He breaks it briefly,
Yeah,
right? I mean, because then Angelique has to restart it.
yeah. It's really cool. And he's a descendant of Ben. And ironically, it was Barnabas who taught Ben how to write. So he
Right.
read Ben's journals. And in the beginning, it looks like Professor Stokes might even be a threat to Barnabas as well, because and that's one thing that always kind of jumped out at me. And I think a lot of fans, it's like, wow, Professor Stokes was sort of sniffing around, and seemed like he was going to become a threat to Barnabas. And then it's like, who do you root for? Because
Yeah.
now the vampire or former vampire is the protagonist of the show, but then you have a potential vampire hunter or occult scholar who's on him, and I think that's why they never really could fully bring Stokes into the fold with Barnabas and Julia and Willie.
Yeah.
And I don't think Stokes is definitely he's a good person. He's a protagonist. I think Barnabas is what the things that Barnabas has done. I don't know if Stokes would have been okay with that
Right.
upon finding out,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because there's part of me that wishes he was fully brought
Yes.
in. Because I
Yeah.
wonder, like, how many more stories we would have got with
I
him.
know, I know.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, I was very happy at the end when they come back from what, 1840, the
Yeah.
one where okay, yeah, I was where it's kind of before they go to the lottery type story with, it is kind of like a fitting end, the Dark Shadows, when they stop Gerard and they fix everything and they come back to the 1970. And I
Yeah.
was happy that it was Barnabas, Julia, and Stokes.
Agree. Yeah.
I was very happy that he went back to help them and he was one of the main three when he came back.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah,
that I thought that was really cool too. And he spent what 36 hours or something in the playroom waiting for the
right.
staircase through time to appear. And then he joined them in 1840. And right away he knew who Judah Zachary was when Julia told him that Gerard was actually possessed by Judah Zachary, and he's the one who caused the devastation in the future. So it was really cool. I wish they had done more with Professor Stokes when they brought him into 1840. He does
Right.
explain parallel time to them, to the people in 1840, but it would have been cool to have him even more involved, I think, in that storyline, because he's there for a couple episodes. But I'm glad they did bring him in and have him join
Yeah,
Barnabas
he's
and
part of like
Julia.
the main team at the end.
He is. Well, he's
Very end, but I
yeah,
do like that.
he's an ally. He's an
Yeah,
ally, but I think there's a certain line where he can't cross a certain line because of his moral compass. I think it would be I think there would be a conflict there in some degree, which is perfect Dark Shadows. I think it would have been kind of cool if he found out, because then you got to struggle with, wow,
right.
who's in the right here? It would have been
Yeah,
kind of
he's
interesting.
cooler than Dr. Woodard. So you're definitely,
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
rooting for Barnabas in that case, but with him,
Then
it'd be
it's like,
hard.
ooh.
And he kind of almost finds out, right? Isn't it? It's because of Adam kind of takes the curse away that
They're
then he
all, yeah.
sees Barnabas as a regular person, so he stops thinking he's a vampire,
I think that
right?
must
I
be
think something
why.
like, yeah,
Yeah, he was off the trail at that point.
yeah, yeah,
I think it's because he saw Barnabas during the day. There are theories that he did figure it out and just didn't say anything because he realized Barnabas was cured. There could be a supernatural explanation. Maybe Ben
right,
from beyond the grave, his ghost, is like protecting
right,
Barnabas
right.
still by keeping his descendant from learning the truth. I don't know. He also has, as you pointed out, that great wit.
Yeah.
Um, there's a great line where he says, in the Leviathan storyline, he says, I suppose I'd better pay a visit to the antique shop, which specializes in a succession of strange, disposable little boys. They must have had such a blast writing lines for Professor Stokes.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many good actors on Dark Shadows, but I think Thayer David is one of the best with Nancy Barrett, I think,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
John Carlin maybe is where you
Oh,
don't feel like they were really reading the teleprompter.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think maybe they were just a little bit better at memorizing lines, which I mean, for Jonathan Frid, it's so hard. It was every day so much. But
Yeah. And he was dyslexic too.
maybe they just had that knack some actors have where they could really just memorize them, and it allowed them to invest just a little bit more into their
Mhm.
performance because they weren't worried about staying on the teleprompter.
Yeah.
And so Thayer David, yeah, I mean, as Ben Stokes, he's just so
Oh, yeah.
heartwarming, heartbreaking, and then yeah, he's got that wit, and then when he plays villains later on too, he's just so
Oh,
great.
yeah. Count
He's
Patofi
so
is
great.
so good.
Yeah,
Yeah. Or the
he's so
evil
great.
Professor Stokes in Parallel Time.
It is, yeah.
The Timothy Stokes. It's yeah, and when with that type of that wry humor, people say, "Oh, Dark Shadows had comedy in it." It's not comedy so much as it doesn't undermine the suspense or the drama of the show. It's just adds a witty, intelligent sort of humor
Yeah.
to the proceedings, I think. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about some of the storylines that he was in. So he showed up during the Adam storyline. So why do you feel Professor Stokes was kind of a bridge between the two types of
I
Dark
mean,
Shadows? Can you
well,
explain that?
I think because it went, between the more like we were talking about the dread, slow burn, and then the more monster mash at the end. I think your
Mhm,
typical or one type of horror story, you got the monster on top, and then you got your victims who have no idea really what's going on.
mhm.
You know what I mean? Like there's these soap opera characters living their soap opera lives, and there's a vampire preying on them. They don't know it's a vampire. They don't know what's going on. Or, if it's your camp counselors and Jason, whatever, they don't really know what's going on. And the fear is the unknown. And this thing that's picking at them from the dark one by one, that kind of story.
Mhm.
Um, But I think when you bring an expert in, like Professor Stokes, like you said, he knows a little bit about everything or whatever, and he knows the rules of the game, it kind of changes it. You know what I mean? So instead of being where they don't know what's going on, they don't know what's attacking, he's got theories, or
Mhm.
he knows what it is. He may not know who it is, but he knows what it is, and he knows how to stop it or how to find it. And it kind of changes that. And I think later on the show, everybody's a monster. Like
Yeah.
all your main characters are basically monsters. You know, you got the witch, you got a werewolf, you got Barnabas, Julia, mad scientist, kind of. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, everybody is this larger than life kind of uh, creature, monster. And then even a lot of your regular characters, Sandor, Magda, um, they kind of know what's going on. You know, they know about curses and stuff like
Mhm.
that. They get into, you know, the Judah Zachary time. I mean, Desmond Collins is a student of the occult.
Mhm.
They mentioned, I think Quentin is a student of the occult, and
Yeah.
maybe it's parallel time, but I mean, he built a stairway to time in the basement.
Yeah.
Nicholas Blair. So all these characters later on also know what's going on. And
Yeah.
so you kind of need more characters like so Professor Stokes. So I think they saw with him that having an expert or whatever makes it a different story. Because if everybody's a monster, your regular soap opera characters don't have a chance. I mean, look at Joe in
Poor Joe.
the Adam story. Yeah, I mean, Vampire League. I mean, he can't. You know, there's all these monsters walking around, and he just gets his life ruined. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
um, the regular soap opera stuff kind of goes away, and you get all these characters who are kind of experts, and they all know the rules of the game or little bits of it, and they have more of a hint of it. And I think when they brought Stokes in, I mean, it's subconsciously, but I feel like it had to be nice to have a character that knew stuff
Mhm.
and how it could change their writing and it could change the stories and the conflicts.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like, you know, you got pre-Professor Stokes and then you got after Professor Stokes, where, you know, he's really the only expert, but later on, there's everybody's kind of an expert, or everybody is a on that level of a
Mm.
monster, or they know what's going
Yeah.
on.
They did have a proto Professor Stokes and Dr. Peter Guthrie for in the
Right.
Laura
Sure.
storyline. He was a parapsychologist, but he didn't last long. He did not fully know the rules of the game clearly because Laura took him out. She killed
Right.
him. But he was also really cool. I liked Dr. Peter Guthrie too. But yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, once you have Stokes in there, it does kind of the trajectory of that whole storyline, I think, goes in that fully embraces what Dark Shadows has now become when you get
Yeah, and
into
it frees the
Adam.
writers up to kind of just include more people that are
Mm.
wacky and know what, you know, they're kind of done all these
Yeah,
eccentricities, and you know, Nicholas Blair. You can just bring in all these people,
yeah,
and even Barnabas seems to kind of gain more knowledge as he goes.
sure.
What is
Yeah.
it? The numbers, the number of the universe
Secret
or
number
whatever.
of the
Like,
universe.
yeah, I mean, he
Secret
seems to
magic
know
number of
more
the
about the
universe.
occult than he does at the end later than he does at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And then later in 1897, he's explaining what zombies are and how he encountered it in the West
Right,
Indies. I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, okay.
right. So
Um,
I feel like, yeah, Stokes was kind of the door to that.
yeah.
Kind of
Okay.
opened that up, and then you started getting more and more people that knew what's going on, and it kind of changed the story. And
Mhm.
your regular people just sort of drifted away a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I liked about Stokes in that Adam storyline, so he does, he becomes involved in combating the dream curse. He's helps against Nicholas Blair. But he helps Adam too. Adam goes
Yeah.
he takes in Adam. He figures Adam out. He figures out what's going on here, brings Adam to live with him and teaches him and starts to humanize Adam. And I like those scenes where he's like has the flashcards and he's teaching
Hmm.
Adam. And I think those are really great. It's a great pairing. It's Professor Stokes has a student now and he
Yeah.
wants to help him. And it does show, it shows that Stokes is good at heart. Like he's trying to help this creature that's, this misunderstood creature.
Yeah.
And then when Adam is corrupted by Nicholas Blair and Adam goes really dark and starts acting awful, but it's under the influence of Blair, the one person who will still take Adam back in and tell him, I don't think you're evil. I don't think is Stokes. Stokes
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately, at the end, it's kind of a nice bookend because Stokes is the one who ends up trying to help Adam at the end, and then Adam disappears. We don't see him again. I thought that was really a cool thing.
I agree. And I liked how he kind of just accepted him right off the bat too.
Yeah,
Like wasn't afraid of him, wasn't, he just took him in
yeah,
and tried to help him. And it was a nice, especially at that point where Stokes is, yeah, he's kind of this wry, sarcastic, funny, eccentric, but then it really showed like a human side to him and a
yeah.
different side. And it was cool.
Agree. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we go into the Quentin's ghost and werewolf storyline. And who do they bring in to combat Quentin? But of course, Professor Stokes to help perform an exorcism. He brings in Madame Finley, Madame Janet
Right?
Finley. But I think this is where we see Stokes. Quentin is such a formidable presence because even Stokes's exorcism fails. Um, that's like, wow. It's because up to that point, Professor Stokes has been like, this is the guy you go to
Yeah,
get
he's the guy,
help.
right.
He'll be combating the supernatural. But even he couldn't exorcise Quentin's ghost. With Quentin's ghost showing up in the mirror, and then the curtains
Mhm.
in Stokes' room catch on fire and stuff.
Yeah. No, it's cool. And he's the one who kind of figures out, right, that he must have died in the room, and by them the kids opening it up is what let the ghost out in the first place and
I
stuff
think
like that.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he also, of course, suggests a seance. And I think even in this in Ron Barry interview that I'm going to be playing at the end, he says the only logical solution to the problem is a seance.
Well, in
Stokes is
Dark Shadows it might be.
Stokes is always
Yeah.
ready to have a seance.
Yeah.
And there are several instances where Stokes is leading the seance. He never gets involved with the werewolf situation, which I thought was interesting too, because it's like they're keeping Stokes away from that because kind of wish they had involved Stokes in that to help with the
Yeah.
Chris Jennings situation, because surely he must have seen the reports of people getting mangled by a wild animal, and I would think Stokes would kind of be attuned to that, but they never
Yeah,
bring him in
and
on
I
that.
think he would have felt for him because I mean that's the
Yeah.
classic thing with the werewolf is that they don't want to do what they do.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's not
Hmm.
really Chris's fault.
Hmm.
He doesn't want to do it. He's trying to chain himself up. Not very well usually, but he's trying.
Yeah.
And I think he would have helped him too. Yeah.
I think so too, and I'm surprised they wouldn't have gone to Stokes to get help, because they usually do. Like when Vicky goes into the past, and when Barnabas tries to get the herbs from from Professor Stokes
Right.
to go into the past, and even drops a hint that Barnabas is from the past. Again, Julia does that funny like she like and then we go into 1897, but then we come back. We have the Leviathans storyline, the H.P. Lovecraft inspired storyline. He becomes an ally against the Leviathans. He doesn't do a ton, but he does.
Yeah.
Megan and Philip Todd recognize him as a threat because he goes into the antique shop and he's kind of snooping around. He helps with the Tate painting. He goes to Professor Osmond, I think, to get the overlayer taken off
Right.
of the
Yes, I know what you
painting
mean.
and stuff. So, but he doesn't do a ton in Leviathans. He does. He is aware of the Naga symbol and stuff. Of course, he references. He knows what it is and stuff. But
Yeah, I wish he was in that a little more.
yeah,
Because that seems like it would have been perfect
yeah,
for him, just going up against, again, it's kind of like that Call of Cthulhu type stuff, having the occult expert who knows all about cults and everything,
yeah.
really leading the fight against them. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in that storyline, so I get it.
Mhm.
Because once you bring Angelique in and stuff too, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Um, and there's not maybe room for him, I guess they didn't think, but it would have been cooler to have him in it a little bit more.
Yeah, he was there, but I mean, he was an ally against the Leviathans, but
Right.
I think his role gets a little more reduced as we go on into, especially, I think after 1897, it kind of dials down. Then we go into parallel time. There's the parallel Timothy Stokes,
Right.
but then when we go to 1995, he's a prominent player in 1995, and I think when you see Stokes in 1995, it's shocking
Yes.
because he is broken. Whatever happened at Collinwood in 1970, in the summer of 1970, must have been so horrific that it actually broke Professor Stokes. That's that's how bad it must have been.
Yeah.
That's
That that whole story, that's great. I mean, because I think, is that only like 2 weeks?
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, but it's like the way they changed the set
Yeah.
was so shocking
Yeah.
when they first walk into it. The Collinwood set, I mean,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, because Stokes, he tried the exorcism, right, to get rid of Gerard, and
Yes, and it
that's
incurred
what
his
set everything
wrath.
off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he, yeah, just completely broken because they feel like he failed and he brought doom on all these people who, horrible things apparently happened to. Yeah, it was very shocking. That 2 weeks, the way they go, I'm surprised they didn't try to draw it out longer, but I'm so glad they didn't
Yeah.
because it's so impactful when it's just the 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's like it's an ice pick. It's like a
Yeah.
quick like, oh my God. It's super shocking. But I think it was a very conscious choice to have Stokes and Carolyn too, as sort of what the hell happened here,
Yeah.
It's just and then Stokes dies. Gerard/Judah kills Professor Stokes in 1995. So it's a really shocking. And then, of course, they go to the summer of 1970, and we meet Professor Stokes's niece, Hallie Stokes, who
Right.
comes to live at Collinwood. And then Stokes tries to help. They have these clues, the clues that Carolyn gave them in 1995 to prevent the oncoming disaster. So Stokes is trying, again, he's an ally. He's trying to help
Hmm.
them to figure these out. He goes to Sebastian Shaw, the astrologer, and there are a couple of interesting conversations there between Stokes and Shaw, and they try to get Sebastian Shaw to help, but he's, of course, under Roxanne's power, which we find out later. So, and then Stokes, one of the things that was supposed to happen was that Stokes was supposed to leave and go to Europe. So they tell him, oh, not, you can't go to Europe. And I have no plans to go. And then he does. And he
Yeah, I know.
leaves. Like, you knew you weren't supposed to. Why did you do it?
Well, maybe he had an acting job he had to take, and he had to be
Yeah, that's it.
off the
That's what it
show for a
was.
little bit.
That's what it was. Yes.
Yeah.
There was an interesting, somebody was telling me there's an Steve, my friend Steve was telling me there's an interesting fanfic story. It's like he went to Europe to find the one man who could help them against Gerard. And in the fanfic story, it was Count Patofi. It's like, I would love to see that scene. Two
Yeah,
Thayer
that would be
David roles.
awesome. That would be yeah. If you could only have Stokes against Patafi, that would be so
That would
great.
have, I mean, I can't believe they never brought Count Patofi back. They must have they must have had that in their back pocket as a we're going to do this eventually, because it's so crazy that they didn't. And that would have been
Yeah,
amazing having Thayer David. I mean, they did do the split screen thing in parallel time with Alexis and Angelique.
true.
So
Yeah,
maybe they could have done something like that.
yeah, that
Um,
would be awesome.
yeah, and then like you said, 1840, Stokes comes down the stairway through time to help Barnabas and Julia, and then they come back together, and they're the last. They see Elizabeth comes in, tells them they're late to the historical society,
Right.
and then that's it. So we see Stokes he's one of the few characters who we see at the very last in the primary timeline before it
Yeah,
goes
and
to
they're kind
parallel
of
time.
victorious too. I mean, it's
They
implied
were,
that things are better, the historical society and all that stuff. So,
yeah.
it is a nice ending, and yeah, I was very happy as a big fan of his that he was there. As I said before, I really
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I love his whole look too, because it's a very different look from Ben or Matthew Morgan. He had that like shaggy hair and
yeah.
kind of stubble and stuff. And he has a monocle. He has,
Is a born to wear a monocle. Yeah,
boy,
he was born for it.
boy,
Yeah,
sometimes he's wearing the bow ties. He's kind of nerdy.
yeah. I was watching one of the early. Well, again, I went back and watched them, and Barnabas mentions, and I had forgot this, that Stokes apparently wrote a treatise on witchcraft in America.
Yeah.
And in Stokes's line, I forget the exact line, but it's like, how it was horrendously cut by the publishers, and how,
Yes. Yeah.
publishers are the one thing in the world you cannot trust or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they cut his book down like drastically.
Yes, yes. There was another one where he was in like, when Carolyn was hiding Adam in the West Wing, and she mentioned something about her mother's copies of the Federalist Papers. Your mother has copies of the Federalist Papers. He gets like all excited. He wants to
Yeah,
read them.
he's great. I love him. And speaking of Carolyn, in these types of characters, I did like, because Carolyn was number 2 on my list. I do love Carolyn.
Oh yes,
Um,
adore Carolyn. Yeah,
I do. I know it's not canon or anything, but when Sam Hall wrote the TV guide
Oh yeah.
epilogue thing, because I believe, doesn't Carolyn become like a paranormal investigator
Yes, I could
because of
totally
all
see
the, and
that.
I loved that because I love her character, and I am fully willing to accept that as canon, as what happened to her after.
I could absolutely see that for
Yeah.
sure, because I mean, everything that took place over the course of her life in Collinwood, all the horrors that have transpired, I could see her going in that direction and wanting to understand the unknowable,
Yeah, and after the Leviathan thing and the marriage and all that. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So
sure, yeah,
I did love that. I can see her as that type of character as well. So
yeah, yeah. And then we have Professor Stokes in House of Dark Shadows, a different version of Professor Stokes in House of
right.
Dark Shadows. What do you think of House of Dark Shadows and that take on Stokes?
I like House of Dark Shadows. I like it a
Me
lot. I
too.
mean, I can recognize how it hurt the show maybe overall, by them making it, taking the writers away and all the stuff that they did, and taking the actors away for that long. And
Mm,
I can recognize the overall impact it had on the show. But I do love it. I think it's great.
same. Yeah.
I think it's a great, just straight on horror movie. I love Carolyn as a vampire.
Mhm.
I love that the police just accept it, and they're carrying around stakes and crosses and hammers, and
Yeah.
they're ready to go. I think it does a very good job, I think, of taking the overall stories and putting it into a movie. I enjoy it. I think it's great.
Yeah, same here. It did. I know what you're saying. I mean, I don't know if you listened to the episode I did with Mary O'Leary of Why Dark Shadows Ended.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, with that whole, because Jonathan Frid didn't like the movie, and it was
True. Yes. Yeah.
that led to the conflict with him and Dan Curtis, which I think ultimately is what led to the end of the show too. But I love House of Dark Shadows too. It's like the Dan Curtis's Hammer film that he made.
Yes.
It just has
Totally.
it, and Stokes in it is, I mean, it's Stokes from the show, but it then goes to the next step of like, okay, what would happen if Stokes found out about all of this? And it's like, oh,
Right.
this goes in fully in the vampire hunter direction. And but then he becomes a vampire himself, which then shows how formidable Barnabas is as well. I also really liked, we talked a lot about Stokes not he's in that group. I love the dynamic between Stokes and Julia too, because
Yes.
Julia's brilliant too, but Julia is secretive, and she lies a lot because she's keeping the truth from
Yes.
Stokes, and Stokes
Yes.
calls her on it. And he gets frustrated because he's like, well, if you're not going to let me in, I'm not going to tell you. That's what
Right.
I know, kind of thing. And there's an impasse there because, and they're kind of sparring with each other in that way, like they're friends, but they won't. She can't bring him in, and I love those scenes with the two of them too. But it's also kind of frustrating at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, again, I wish you wish they would bring him in
Yeah,
because you love him so much and you want him to be part of the main team,
yeah,
not just like the ally on the outside a little bit.
yeah,
But you get why they didn't.
yeah.
But
Because then
yeah,
you end up with
it's
House of Dark Shadows.
right, exactly. And I feel like Julia, like she was conflicted. She really wanted to bring him in a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh, but yeah, no, they're great. He's great with everybody. He's got great relationships with so many people.
yeah.
He was just such a unique. I mean, you got like the Roger as Rye and Acerbic a lot and stuff like that, but
Sure.
Stokes was just a whole nother level, and he didn't he it wasn't like he was messing with people, but he was just himself unabashedly and didn't really care what
Just
anybody.
honest. You
Yeah,
could just say
just
whatever.
odd and just came in and
No,
just
no
did
real
stuff. And
filter there, but it was so witty. Like when you were
yeah,
catching him looking at the underneath the furniture. And is this an original? I forget the name of it.
right.
What
Yeah, I
pity he
forget the
was
name, but
drunk when
it's
he
so
made
funny.
it.
And I completely forgot about that until I went back and watched it. And it's
Yeah.
so funny. And Barnabas is so mad because he
Yes.
just wants that talisman
Yes.
to protect him from Angelique. And here he is talking about
And he
furniture and
agrees to give.
kind
Yeah.
of hinting, hey, give me the table.
Yeah. And he says, I'll show you the talisman, but first show me the witch.
Yeah,
Stokes says
exactly.
it. It's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so great. He's so great. I just love him so much.
Yeah, and definitely an iconic character from the show, and it's difficult to imagine someone else playing that role, because you don't.
Oh
I've
yeah.
talked about this before too. Like you look at TV now, you never see actors who look or act like Thayer David anymore. Like a lot of those Dark Shadows actors were so distinct in their
Yes.
voices and their demeanor and their appearance. I wonder, like nowadays, who would be somebody who could play Professor Stokes? Can you think of anyone? I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
don't know. I don't even was he in the revival? The 90s?
It was Professor Woodard. They took Dr.
I
Woodard
was going
and
to say he wasn't in that, right? Because I only like watched that once.
yeah, it was Professor Stefan Gerach played the role, and he kind of almost played it a little Thayer David-ish, but
Yeah,
it was they it was they sort of combined some aspects of Professor Stokes with Dr. Woodard, and I
right.
think they did that so that they could leave the door open for a potential Professor Stokes, an actual Professor Stokes to come in, but yeah, it was Professor Woodard, and it was a very similar kind of thing that happened in House of Dark Shadows, where he finds out Barnabas is a vampire, and then Barnabas kills him and turns him into a he turns and then he gets staked or shot with a silver bullet. I think he got staked. But yeah, it's they didn't fully
Yeah, I
bring
don't
it.
know who I would fan cast as him now. It'd be hard. He's so unique.
Yeah,
And he is so good. I mean, Thayer David is just I can't wait to hear the interviews you got. I mean, because he's so good
mhm.
on that show. And I haven't really seen him in anything else that I honestly am really aware of.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen him he was in Journey to the Center of the Earth, the
okay.
Disney movie. He was the villain in that.
All right.
Uh, that was probably his biggest thing that he did outside of Dark Shadows. He was also Nero Wolf. He was going to be in the Nero Wolf series. They did, I think, the pilot, but then he passed away shortly thereafter. And of course, he was in Rocky. I can't remember the name of
Oh,
his
I should
character.
watch it again because I mean I didn't know who he was
Oh,
the last time I've seen Rocky,
yeah, it was
however long ago. So I
he was a character in there, and he also was in. And you may have hosted. I don't know if you hosted. Did you ever host Werewolf of Washington? He's in that
yeah,
too.
yeah. Is he
He's
in
in
that?
a small part. He has a small
Okay.
part in Werewolf of Washington. And one other thing that he was in, which is kind of cool, they did a Spider-Man record, like in the 70s, like a book and record. And
Mhm.
I don't know if it was the book, but he was Kingpin. He was the voice of Kingpin
I
in
probably had that.
that. Yeah, he was the Kingpin voice. And then he was in one of those Spider-Man TV movies in the 70s, but he wasn't Kingpin in that. He was just a villain. He was the villain in that.
Okay.
So he did a bunch of, and he did a lot of theater for sure.
Yeah, and
Uh,
so many of them were just New York theater actors, right?
yes,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, so, but yeah,
There,
he's great. He's up there with, like I said, John Carlin, Nancy Barrett, I think are my, Laura Parker's also, I mean, so many of them are great, but
yeah,
Thayer David's one of the best actors on that show, I think.
yeah,
He just really, really good. And he played such a variety of different characters.
yes.
Stokes is my favorite, but I do love them all.
I think he
Uh,
played the most characters in the show, followed next by Nancy Barrett.
right. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the last question I have for you is, if there's a future version of Dark Shadows, what would you like to see? Should there be a another version of Dark Shadows? Should it be left alone, or should there be a
Yeah,
new?
I don't know. I mean, whenever they announce they're going to do one, I get excited.
Mhm.
But none of them seem to capture, even the ones Dan Curtis, has a hand
Mhm.
in, don't really seem to capture it very well. I have not listened to any of the Big Finish.
Mhm.
So I mean, those are pretty well done, right? And popular, and they're able to carry it over, or
Kingdom of the Dead, I thought was excellent. I thought that one was really good. I think they're hit or miss. Some
yeah,
of them, it depends who wrote it and who. The more recent ones I have not been a big fan of, but some of them are really good. I would recommend Kingdom of the Dead as if you're gonna dive into those. It's like
yeah,
a box set with 4 episodes, and they
right.
had David Warner as the main villain in that.
Oh, nice,
Yeah, yeah,
nice,
yeah. He was like an angel of death. And David Selby's in it as Quentin. They recast Barnabas. What Andrew Collins is the actor who played Barnabas. Laura
Mhm.
Parker is in it as Angelique. Um, Catherine Lee Scott's in it as Maggie. So they recast David with Alec Newman, who was going to be Barnabas in the 2004 pilot. So
Right.
David's in it, Carolyn's in it. I mean, she's later on in it, but there's a lot of the people from the show. That's the best part, I think, of the Big Finish audios is hearing the actors reprise their roles. I think that's really fun.
Yeah,
So.
I could see that. I mean, it's just hard because I mean, if it's ever done again, it's obviously not going to be done as a 5 day a week soap opera.
Mhm.
And soap operas are so unique and the way that they can tell stories over such a long period of time and just fold back upon themselves with storylines and characters and everything. And so when you do it as an hour long show every week or something, or a movie, it's going to be different. And so I don't think it seems to work when they try to do the exact same stories again. But
So
at the same
would
time,
you rather see a sequel show?
maybe, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of those that have been successful. When they take something. I mean, Twin Peaks: The Return. I was saying, it's one of my favorite shows. When they came back and did that 28 years later, it was brilliant. You know what I mean? And even stuff like, Ash versus Evil Dead, where they take the Evil Dead and 20 years later, it's a direct sequel, like a legacy type sequel. So sometimes those can be really cool, and it could be brand new. Having someone come into Collinsport now, you know what I mean, would definitely probably be the way to go. Although it's so ingrained to me to be in like the 60s and 70s as well, that you kind of want to see it as a period piece. I'm all over the map on it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how I would attack it.
Yeah.
If I had a chance to do it, I don't know how I would go for it at first.
I think it's difficult.
Yeah.
But you mentioned like the serialized aspect of it. All of these types of genre shows now are serialized. When they
Sure.
drop those shows on like Netflix or something like that, you get all of those episodes in a row. And you got to kind of, like you mentioned, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina that you did a diorama for. Like, you can't just jump in and watch one episode. I think
True.
it's one of those things
Totally.
where it is kind of serialized in its own way.
I think though some part of what makes Dark Shadows special is also the filler. And I feel like when you're a soap opera, they're filling a lot of space and time, especially at the beginning. And when you're making these prestige hour-long shows, you're not going to have like that kind of filler because it doesn't really sometimes have a point.
That's
And
true.
it's holding the story back. But it's also part of the charm that makes Dark Shadows so great.
Yeah,
You know what I
you're right.
mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just I think if the right person did it, it'd probably be great. There's so much there.
It has to, I think you called it there too. It has to be the right person who gets it. I think that is key. And I don't know it. I mean, I don't know if anybody would. I haven't watched there's like the Netflix did the House of Usher and those shows. I haven't. Have you watched any of those? I haven't
I have
watched them.
not. I've seen some of his movies.
Okay.
I know who you're talking about. I want to say it's Mike Flanagan, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
So
I haven't seen any of those, but
I have seen some of the movies that he's made, and he's great. And I've heard those shows, Midnight Mass, all of those
yeah.
are really good. But I don't know, yeah, if he was like a diehard Dark Shadows fan, who knows if he was or not? You know what I mean? That would be great. He'd be a good person to do it.
Yeah, I think I have a few people that I would. Some have been on this podcast even who I think have really great ideas to do it. I hope it happens at some point. There's part of me that's afraid too, though. It's like I don't want it to suck. I want it to be
Yeah,
good.
I was not a big fan of the Tim Burton movie. So
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
So
You're
I don't
not
want
alone.
that. I can enjoy. I enjoyed the '90s, the revival a little bit.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the same. And I did see the pilot of that one.
The
Was it like
2004
2001 or something?
2004 pilot. Yeah.
Yeah, I did finally see that pilot, and it just kind of was like, okay.
Yeah. It was I wasn't that impressed with that pilot
Yeah.
myself. And the Depp movie, it's like I talked to a friend who spoke to Tim Burton. He's in the industry, and I guess Tim Burton did want to originally do it as like a more Sleepy Hollow tone to it, and got convinced by the studio to do it as a comedy. And it's like, I don't know. Tim Burton could have just said, no, I don't want to do that, but whatever.
Yeah.
And so cool, Chad. So do you have anything cool coming up that you want to mention or?
No, I mean, just, people the links will be below, I guess. Just you can check out my Instagram or my Etsy store. I do take commissions if anyone wants a Dark Shadows diorama. I'd love to make it. So hit me up.
Wonderful.
But yeah, that's it pretty much. And that's what's really mostly that's what I'm focusing on right now. So.
Very cool. Can we expect a return of Undead Johnny someday?
I don't know. I mean, I did it for you. Was that last year?
Yes, you did for
Halloween, right?
the horror hosts tribute to Dark Shadows. Yes,
that's the
thank you
last
for
time
doing
I did
that.
Undead Johnny was for you last year. So
thank you for doing that.
I have not. No, I don't know. Probably not. We'll see. You never say never.
Yeah.
But I did have. It was fun. I mean, it was a blast. I mean, we made almost 100 shows and
Wow.
did a lot of live shows and stuff as well. It was a great time, and I look back on it very fondly. So,
Well, I hope you never say never, because I
exactly.
think you never know. Undead Johnny could rise from the dead.
I still have my shirt somewhere.
Awesome. Great. All right, Chad. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And
Thank you for having me.
it's my pleasure. And folks, do check out the links below and stick around because the Thayer David interview is coming right up. Hey, I just have some closing thoughts before we get to the interview with Thayer David, so sit tight for that. It was so great talking to Undead Johnny himself, Chad Byers, about Professor T. Eliot Stokes, who is certainly a big favorite of ours and of many fans. Just a few closing thoughts. I think it's clear that Stokes knew more about Barnabas and probably even Christopher Jennings than he let on. Now, I can't remember which episode it was, but I even seem to recall one scene where Julia says in front of Professor Stokes that Barnabas went to the past to help David and Chris. Now, Stokes didn't say anything, but it's interesting that Julia lets this slip in front of him. So, I mean, knowing Stokes, he would have pursued that. So there must have been a reason why he didn't say anything, and he was playing his cards close to the chest, I think. Regarding Barnabas, it seems that Stokes is still unaware that Barnabas is a vampire in 1995, just the way that they talk about Barnabas not being around during the day, etc. But maybe Stokes is pretending. He might be playing that game still, keeping that up. He's thinking, okay, they're still playing this game, I'll play along. Maybe. Or, like I mentioned in the episode, perhaps there's a supernatural explanation in that Ben's spirit is protecting Barnabas from beyond the grave by using some preternatural power that prevents his descendant from seeing the truth. I mean, that knowledge could lead to bad things for all parties involved. For his descendant, his family, Stokes, for Barnabas, for Julia, it could definitely go south. And I think it could. I mean, Stokes is cut from the occult investigator mold. The next natural step is full-on vampire hunter. But I mentioned that Stokes was the one person to still accept Adam at the end, so you have to wonder if there's a pathway to that for Barnabas too, given that he was under a curse. Of course, a vampire isn't a werewolf or a man-made monster who's easily manipulated by a warlock. Barnabas was operating as a predator at full intelligence. He did a lot of bad things. So in the end, Stokes is a valuable and formidable ally, but he's one who needs to be kept at arm's length because his moral code would cause a serious conflict for characters like Barnabas, Julia, and Quentin. I just don't see him being okay with the things that they did. I mean, he's still an ally, though. It's just he has to be kept at arm's length. It's funny because if we look at the archetypes that partly inspired these characters, you sort of have Dracula and Van Helsing as allies. It was just kind of funny. Still, in the end, I think Stokes would have to make some hard decisions if he were to learn the truth about Barnabas. Maybe he did. He might have just seen Barnabas during the day and said, oh, he might have suspected that Barnabas was a vampire, and when he saw him walking around during the day, he said, oh, I suppose I was wrong. Although I can't picture Stokes saying he was wrong. That's tough to imagine, too. Now, as promised, here's the interview with Thayer David from The Ron Barry Show. And I want to give a big thank you to Bob Issel for giving me the okay to include this interview in this episode. Bob actually offers a great 2-CD set of Ron Barry's interviews with Dark Shadows cast members. So if you're interested in purchasing one, drop him a line at bobubas59@gmail.com. bobubas59@gmail.com. And just a little background here, Ron Barry was a popular radio host in Pennsylvania, and he was a big Dark Shadows fan. He interviewed several of the show's actors in 1968 and 1969 while the show was still airing, and among these interviews was a really notable one with several of the actors in attendance. Ron Barry also created his own ongoing radio parody of Dark Shadows called Dumb Shadows, and I believe you can also still get those from Bob. He has those too. Now, the following interview with Thayer David is a little more obscure. It's from 1969, although you may have heard Peter Mack mention it on the Dark Shad Bros show. So there were actually 2 takes of that same interview, but Thayer does say some unique things in each of the takes, so I've included both of them. I started with the second take because the audio quality in that one is better, and when that ends, it'll just go straight into the first take. Now, please bear in mind, and fair warning, these interviews were recorded off the radio on a tape recorder in the late 60s, so the audio quality is not good. It's not good audio quality. I tried my best to clean these up a bit, but I'm not a tech whiz, and they still don't sound all that great. I'll be honest with you. But hey, it's an extremely rare interview with Thayer David from when he was on the show. So without further ado, let's get to it.
And tonight, I've got a guest that I've been looking forward to having on the show for a long time, because we've had Jonathan Frid on the show 3 or 4 times, and as you well remember, we had in one sitting Grayson Hall, Robert Rodan, and Jonathan, and Roger Davis, and Humbert Allen Estrado, but Thayer David couldn't make it that day, and so I'm very, very pleased to welcome Thayer to the Ron Barry Show. And before I introduce him to you, in case you may not have seen Dark Shadows, if you're one of those peons that have to work during the day, you've heard him on the following commercials. You've heard him on True Cigarettes and Progresso Italian Foods and Mohawk Carpets and Flying A Gasoline and Traveler's Insurance. He's a fine actor. He started on Dark Shadows as Matthew Morgan, and then later went on to play Ben Stokes and Professor Stokes, and now Sandor the Gypsy. You've heard his voice on many commercials, and he's a friend, and his name is Thayer David. Thayer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. Good evening.
How many, you've played 4 parts on Dark Shadows.
Yes.
And you told me once that Dark Shadows is a great deal of fun to work on. Why is it so much fun?
Well, I think it's fun because you get an opportunity, or at least I've had an opportunity, to do so many different things, and it's fun because everything is done at tremendous high speed, and that can be nerve-wracking for many people. It can be nerve-wracking for me at times, but in general, I like to be put in a position where I have to make my decisions quickly and get something together very fast, and perhaps put a new character together in a matter of a week or 10 days, including the costume and the makeup as well as the characterization. I enjoy that very much.
Do you devise your own makeup?
Well, we have an excellent makeup man, Vinny Lascalzo, who you know.
Right.
And I work with him and with Ramsey Mosper, our costume designer, who's very good, and I always have a pretty clear idea, and they have their own ideas, and we work out usually it's not so much a compromise as a kind of amalgam of everybody's notions, which usually pleases us all.
Well, I've been to the Dark Shadows set. Lately, it's given me a great deal of pleasure, because the first time I went there, this was to interview Jonathan Frid, and this was long before all the great publicity that he's had, all the television appearances and the magazine articles. I was just interested in the show at that time, and I saw the vampire, and I was wild about it, because nothing like that had ever been on television before, daytime or nighttime, except for the old Universal horror movies. And so I've been there, I think, twice to work, and the rest, just to socialize. And I've made some good friends at Dark Shadows, and I'm very happy about it. But what I was going to get into was, now you people, I know that the viewing audience sees a half-hour production, but I'd like you, Thayer, to give us a rundown when we come back from a commercial of exactly how much time you put into that show, because I know it's a great deal. So we'll be back with Thayer David right after this commercial. I don't know, Thayer, whether it's one of yours, but we'll play it by ear. My guest is Thayer David, and Thayer is a regular on Dark Shadows, probably more of a regular than anybody else. Before we get into the schedule, Thayer, I have to make one observation about Dark Shadows. You've gone into the past, you've been in the present. I think that Dark Shadows is the only show that could get away with something like that, using the same actors.
Well, Dan Curtis, who produces Dark Shadows, has the idea that people like to see what you might almost call a stock company. They like to see the same actors playing different roles.
Right.
If there is some logical reason for it, if there is a flashback, or if perhaps as well their ancestors or descendants. And I think it's worked out very well. I think the viewers are always kind of wondering what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've managed to establish a convention for the show, which does permit us to do pretty much anything we want to.
Right. Now, about the schedule that you people put in, when does your day start and when does it end? Give us a rundown if you can.
Well, our day starts, strictly speaking, the day before, after the show has been taped. We do a read-through and we cut the script. That is, we remove any lines that we're not going to use, do any rewrites, and so we have a corrected text to take home with us. And the day proper starts at 8 a.m. Or perhaps if you're lucky enough to be in the second or third act at 8:15 or 8:30. And we work upstairs in the rehearsal room until 10:30, at which time we have our lunch break. And by this time, we've blocked out approximately the moves of the show, but not on the set. And we have our lunch break at 10:30 when one isn't too inclined to eat lunch. And if one has a particularly difficult makeup or costume job for a character, it's usually wise to start doing that at 10:30 and try to get it out of the way before 11:30.
Right.
When we go downstairs and start our camera blocking.
Now, let me interrupt you for 1 second. Your character of Sandor the Gypsy, I know, is a difficult makeup. You put that makeup on at 10:30 in the morning and keep it on all day?
Well, it doesn't take as long as it, we started it recently, and it took about an hour to start, but now it takes only about 25 minutes. But I find that kind of dark makeup sets a great deal better if you leave it on for 3 or 4 hours before you work. It blends in. There's a tendency for it to be splotchy at first, and then it blends into your skin a great deal better, which makes it look fine and makes it terribly difficult to get off when the day is over.
Right. Okay. Now you were at the stage, I think, where you're going to do a run through.
Yeah. Well, we do first our camera blocking and then our run through.
Now, what actually is camera blocking?
Well,
the people
the first time the cameras see us is when we come down at 11:30, and we're on the sets, and at that time we get a chance to adjust the moves we've approximated upstairs to the actual set, and the cameras get a chance to adjust their shots, which they've only had on paper previously.
Right.
Then at 2:15 we have a run through. I'm sorry, at 2:15 we have a dress rehearsal. And at 3:15 we tape the show. The times on the blocking and the run-through are a little more flexible because we do stop and start a great deal.
Right. May I tell you what one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had?
Yeah.
At 4 o'clock, all the actors go back upstairs and watch the show that's on the air that day. Now, I have to explain to some people who may not realize this. The show is not live. It's, taped a week in advance?
Usually a week. There are sometimes a little less than a week. Very occasionally a little more than a week.
Yeah, well, right now you're a little bit ahead.
Well, no, we rearranged some shows last week, but I think we're just about a week ahead.
I see. Well, anyway, you can sit home and watch Dark Shadows and be caught up in the suspense and the monsters, the vampires and the werewolves and the ghosts and the witches and the warlocks and the whole thing. But if you try to sit there at 4 o'clock with the actors themselves, and especially Grayson Hall, who is just a great lady who I'm deeply in love with, sit there and try to watch that show seriously, it just cannot be done, can it?
Well, I'm afraid we have memories of shooting the show, which generally tend to kind of pose a certain levity on our watching.
That's right.
Things don't always work just the way they were planned. Very often they work better, but sometimes they don't work as well, and quite often they're kind of unpredictable.
Right. I have to give you a couple of examples which really broke me up. At one point, Quentin was saying something, and the girl who takes care of the music on the show, her name is Sybil Weinberger, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah.
And she just, for no reason, threw a stinger after one of Quentin's lines, and there was Jonathan saying, "Atta girl, Sybil." And try to watch that show with Humbert L. on the Strader someday. Boy, that'll take a lot of doing.
Well, Humbert is inclined to levity, I must say. We all are at those moments. The relief of having done the day show is always kind of conducive to a rather relaxed spirit by that time.
May I tell you, Thayer, some of my favorite moments from Dark Shadows?
Yeah, please.
Well, there was a scene where Jerry Lacey was playing the Reverend Trask, and he was in the middle of a very dramatic exorcism where he was exorcising Angelique, who was tied to a tree, and a fly kept buzzing around his nose. And what could he do? He couldn't move it away with his hand because it would have blown the whole mood. And at the very peak of that scene, the fly landed right on his nose. And what did he do? He just blew it off, which broke me up. And there was another scene where Jonathan, who has a tendency occasionally, especially on a Friday or a Thursday towards the end of the week, of blowing a line or two here and there. The scene where Jonathan was holding the gun on Adam, and he sent Grayson to Collinwood, and he called her every other girl's name in the show but Julia. And then Adam took the gun away from him, and it broke in half. Which was all right because in that particular sequence, Adam, was Mr. Strongman, and he could have easily broken the gun in half. But it wasn't supposed to happen.
Well, guns, for some reason, are always a source of strange mistakes of that kind on stage. There's probably 1,000 stories about how the gun didn't go off.
Right.
Somebody threw it at the other actor, or said, "Bang, you're dead," or some other instant improvisation.
Right. But I'll tell you, without the lines being blown, the show, it makes the actors more human, because the show itself is so unbelievable that if you look forward to somebody blowing a line just to show that Barnabas is really not a vampire, he's a human being, he's an actor, everything that goes on that show somehow fits in, You've never blown a line, have you?
I have blown a couple, but I think they were comparatively imperceptible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember come on quite as often. John particularly will get himself sometimes on a schedule where he'll be on 14 or 15 shows without any let-up.
Right.
And that can produce an awful lot of fatigue and also an awful lot of confusion as to whether what's happening today is what happened yesterday and what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right, right. Thayer, we're going to... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because, of course, there's always the necessity of repeating things like your favorite lines,
Right, right.
You can't do that, Mr. Barnabas, or, similar ritual lines which somehow tend to be in every script and tend to be in every script 4 or 5 times.
Right, right. Before we take a break for commercial, and I'll ask you to do this quickly without too much preparation, you played 4 characters on the show.
Yes.
Can you give us an example of each of them now?
Yeah, I think so.
First one was Matthew Morgan.
As Matthew, I tried to use a real kind of down east accent. It was kind of heavy, and I used to use the real down east kind of pronunciation, like I'd say, I can't do nothing. And but then I kind of lightened it up a little, lightened up the accent, lightened up the voice, made it a little faster and more nervous.
Right.
And Professor Stokes has what I suppose one would describe as a cultured accent. He's, of course, a man of considerable academic training, as his expertise in exorcism and seances makes abundantly clear. And for the gypsy, I've dug into my past and an accent I once used in a production of William. And the gypsy sounds something like this. He's sort of Hungarian, I suppose. And it's a very peculiar accent. Sometimes he's pretty tough and bullying. And then again, of course, if you stand up to him, he's kind of cringing.
That's great. Now you know the voice. I'm sure you know the man. Thayer David, welcome to the Ron Barry Show.
Good evening, Ron. Thanks very much.
You have been playing, I think, more characters on Dark Shadows than anybody else in that series, haven't you?
Well, I've played 4 now with my new characterization of the Gypsy Centaur.
Right. That's a record for that show, isn't it?
I think 4 is a record. There are a number of people who played 3. In some cases, though, they've been relatives or ancestors, so that they've really borne a pretty close family resemblance. Mine have been 3 of them at least have been totally different.
Right.
Ben was, to some extent, a version of Matthew Morgan, which I'd done about a year earlier on the show, and in which I've been killed off. Quite spectacularly.
Yeah.
And in that I used a kind of down east accent, and for Matthew I used something that was, I felt, quite authentic from my remembrance of spending time up there as a child. I modified that a little for Ben.
Could you give us a little example of Matthew Morgan?
Matthew was the real kind of old main thing, and I ain't gonna do nothing. I
think the first time I met you, I commented on that. I had been watching Matthew Morgan. I hadn't been watching it at that time. I think that's even before Jonathan came into the series, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was when the series was still confined to the present, and the supernatural element it was pretty manifest, but it was much more a question of just ghosts and haunting of the house, really.
Right.
No vampires.
Right. I remember commenting to you at that time. When I first met you, they were in the past, and you were playing Ben. And I said to you, how many times have you said, I can't do it, Mr. Byers, you know? And so now Professor Stokes is a completely different character than either of those two, right?
Well, Professor Stokes has a more cultured accent. I don't know, perhaps in many ways he's the hardest one to do for me because the voice is closest to my own. But
right.
There's a certain gravity there due to the situations that I have to handle. I think the most reasonable thing in this situation, perhaps the only reasonable thing, would be to have a seance.
That's all you ever do.
I'm always giving them practical advice, having a seance or an exorcism.
Well, as you know, in my series of Dumb Shadows, that's a great part of it. The Professor Stokes character, which is a direct spoof on Professor Stokes, is always holding seance.
Yeah.
But this time, in this series, they never work.
Well, I sometimes wonder if they don't often cause more trouble than they.
Well, can you give us a bit of an example of Professor Stokes?
Well, let's see. Collins, I realize you may find this a trifle difficult to believe, but centuries of scholarship have proven the I Ching to be of real practical value.
Real practical value. That's funny. Now, I'll tell you, we're going to take a break for a commercial. Whether it's one of yours or not, I don't know. But we'll be back, and then I want to talk a little bit about Sandor, okay? And we'll be back with Thayer David in just a moment. My guest is Thayer David. He's one of my favorite actors, and I say that, again, not because he's on the phone with me, but I've told many, many people about this. There are 3 people on that show, Dark Shadows, that can carry the series, that can carry a whole show. One of them is Jonathan Fritz. The other is Howard Allen Estrado. And the third is Thayer David. Now, Thayer, I think, as far as I can see, Sandor the Gypsy is the first comedy relief that Dark Shadows has had. Am I right, or am I just off base there?
Well, I don't know. I think that there were certain elements in Ben, and there were certainly elements in Willie Loomis, the part that John Carlin played.
Mm-hmm.
But the plot was a little entangling at those points.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think offhand of any character that had the opportunity. The characters generally are so driven by some direct motivation that they don't have too much time to stop and be at all comic. But Sandor is characterized as somebody who is on every side at once, and easily purchasable, easily swayed from one position to another by a thought of trifling financial advantage,
right?
Which makes it comic. And then, of course, he's a kind of typical stage bully, the kind of person who is very domineering to those he feels he can manage it with, and very sycophantic, very subservient to anybody who shows him a taste of power, which again gives it a nice variation.
That is the word, variation and versatility.
A nice variation of mood, anyway, and quick transition.
Right. I think your characters of Ben and Sandor have been my 2 favorites. As far as Dumb Shadows is concerned, the Professor is much easier to work with because there are so many ridiculous situations that you can get him into. Yeah. Can you give us a brief example now of Sandor? And this, I think, as far as the accent is concerned, is my favorite.
Well, it is sometimes very hard to get into the accent when I'm not giving the lines, and of course, I'm a little reluctant to talk in the accent, because usually when I talk in the accent, somebody pays me something.
publicly now for doing that promo for Dumb Shadows.
You probably won't.
I have been told by a few people that I do the best Thayer David in the business, you know, and I don't know. I'm not really doing an impression of you. I'm doing an impression of one of those characters, you know.
Yeah.
The way I distinguish them is that Professor Stokes is, well, let's put it this way. Ben Stokes, my character, Byers Stokes, his voice is a great deal gruffer,
yeah,
than Professor Stokes, and I do the lines like, "Mr. Barnabas, I don't understand this. You can't do this, Mr. Barnabas," you know. And a little bit of a variation is Professor Blokes, who exercises the house and says things like, "Oh, big do-gooder up in the sky, help us rid this house of its evil spirits that won't go bye-bye," you know, things like that. Let's talk about your commercial activities, because there are a great many of them. How many products, and you can mention brand names, it's all right. How many commercials have you done? I know there are many.
I don't know. I think I must have around 30 to 35 on now. There are a number of things I've done that aren't on yet, a number of things I've done that are temporarily or, excuse me, permanently inactive, I don't know. And I think with multiple commercials, for example, the Progresso that you played is one of a series of 8.
Right.
The True, which is not being done on radio at the moment,
Right,
is one of a series of, I think, 12. And there are a number of products that I have, anyway, 4 to 10 commercials out for, but there are at least 35 I know of that are
right,
actively being played, and then they tend to, excuse me, to go blank or go dormant for a cycle or so and then come back, so one is never quite sure. Just find out when the checks come in.
Yeah, well, what I meant was the product. I don't mean how many for each, but I mean, give us an example.
Well, let's see, I have Mohawk carpets. I do some things for General Telephone, which includes Sylvania, and it includes certain advertisements go on telephoning. I have some things out for Laina Sherry.
You really get around on the commercial.
Frankly, I can only remember the ones I've been working on recently.
Right. Well, how do you find the time to? Because you're I know on Dark Shadows a great deal. How do you find the time to do all of this?
Well, commercial jobs are pretty easily adjustable because they only take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to do, which is one of the numerous reasons that they're a real godsend to the actor, because I very often will rush off from Dark Shadows and go and make a 5 or 5:30 appointment and work until 6:30 or 7 and do 3 or 4 things.
That's not bad. Let's take one more break for a commercial. We'll talk about some of your film activities and other things, and Dark Shadows again, and then we'll close out. We'll be back with Thayer David in just a moment. Back we are. My guest is Thayer David. Thayer, you've been an actor for how long?
Well, I'm afraid that with a recent birthday I had, it's now a little over 20 years.
20 years. And it took a daytime, and I never call this show a soap opera. Never. Because it's not. It's not a soap. It took a daytime television series to make you a celebrity. Were you the type of actor who was looking for the celebrity thing, or just satisfied to work?
Well, I think I was just satisfied to work. I was told when I started in the business by a lot of older and wiser heads that if I made it, I would not make it for a good many years because of the physical and vocal type that I am. And I was not perhaps entirely convinced then, but as the years went by, I became more and more inclined to believe that they'd been right.
Right.
And I don't know. I think that like most people's careers, I never really managed mine very well or very consciously. I worked a great deal. I always have worked a great deal. Usually I enjoyed it.
How about films? I know you've done several.
Well, I've done one film at least that always comes up, which is A Journey to the Center of the Earth. quite a well-known and quite a widely shown film, and I think for the kind of film it is, quite a good film. It was not much fun to make.
Which leads us back to Dark Shadows. You told me that Dark Shadows is a great deal of fun to do.
Yes, I think so.
Before you comment on that, I want the people out there to know just what kind of a day you people put in, because I know I've been there. But what the people see is a half hour of production, and they don't really know. So give us an example. When does your day start on Dark Shadows, and when does it end?
Well, if you're in the first act, your day starts at 8. If you're in the second and third act, you might be able to beg off until 8:15 or even 8:30 with luck. Mm-hmm. And presumably...
That's in the morning, of course.
That's in the morning, yeah. Presumably the day before, after the preceding day's show, mm-hmm. Which you may or may not have been on, mm-hmm. you have read through the current script and you've taken the cuts so that you can memorize it. And
now, what are cuts?
Well, the cuts are lines that are written in by the scriptwriter, which either for a matter of time or because of other changes that the producer and the director want to make are either cut out entirely or changed. Mm-hmm. And sometimes this will amount to a very considerable number of lines, so it's a good idea to have them before you go and start to study it.
Right.
And frankly, it's much better if a scriptwriter overwrites a script because it gives you a tremendous sense of relief at the outset. You notice all those lines going, and the ones that remain don't seem as formidable.
Right. Now, go ahead.
We start to block through. Usually, we have not blocked any the night before. That is to say, we start to arrange the moves and the physicalization of the script. And usually people have learned their lines at least partially in the preceding evening.
Right.
So we do that until 10:30, at which time we get our lunch break. Mm. But one isn't very inclined to eat lunch at 10:30.
Right.
Also, if you have, as I do for the Gypsy, a difficult or reasonably long makeup, mm-hmm. Really the best time to do it is at 10:30, between 10:30 and 11:30, which is the lunch hour. It's better to go into the makeup room and get that out of the way.
You mean you stay made up all day right up until taping?
I prefer it, yeah, because for that makeup particularly, that's a very dark makeup.
Right.
And a makeup like that sets better if you put it on 4 to 5 hours ahead of airtime.
Right.
It tends to look a bit splotchy early, and it works into your skin, which makes it probably difficult to wash out. But it does give it a realer look than if you put it on an hour or a half hour before you actually went on air. You'd still see it as much more made up looking.
Right.
So I usually am in the makeup by 11:30, at which time we start to block, which is to say we camera block, that is, which is to say we go downstairs into the studio and start to work with the sets and with the cameras. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time the cameras have had an opportunity to.
Right. Now we're very close to running out of time, so I know you dress rehearsal at 2:15, or
presumably we block until 1:30, then we tape then we do our run through, mm-hmm. And at 2:15 we are supposed to be ready to tape the dress, mm-hmm. and at 3:15 the show.
Right.
And we very often run a little bit over on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, Thayer, it's quite a show. It's the biggest thing I think that ever happened to daytime television. It's funny at times, and I think sometimes it's meant to be funny. It gives everybody a break. I'm glad that you're having so much fun doing it, and I wish you continued success, and I thank you deeply for taking some time out to visit with us on the Ron Barry Show.
Well, I'm delighted to have done so, Ron. It's been a great pleasure.
And we'll be listening for Professor Stokes on Dark Shadows, Santa the Gypsy on Dark Shadows, and Thayer Stokes and Professor Blokes on Dumb Shadows. Right?
I'll be listening.
Okay. If you can do that, you're a better man than I am. Thank you, Thayer.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.